I didn't know it was possible to lose a sister, even when she was still alive. She was sold as a wife before turning 14, and the one who did this to her was our own father. We almost never talked about our father, a man born in Yemen, a few words and many silences. When we were still little, he and my mother separated, and since then his name became a distant echo inside our house. Until one day, he reappeared. He brought gifts, stories about his culture, and an invitation that seemed innocent. I want my daughters to know their roots. Nadia was 13 years old. I was 15. Summer vacation, a new country, a different culture. For two English teenagers, that sounded like an adventure. My mother hesitated. But he promised it would be just a visit, a few weeks, with relatives to expand our world. No sign of danger, no clue of the trap that was already set. He came back talking about Yemen as if it were a magical place, full of golden mountains, smiling people, and pure values. A country where time moved slowly and everything was more real. He said that England had distanced us from what we really were, that we needed to reconnect with our essence. Nadia listened enchanted. She was thirsty for belonging. I wasn't. Even so, I accepted. For my sister, for her, drawings that now included camels, markets, veiled women, for the promise I made, even without words, that always be by her side. I remember the airport, the cold farewell hugs, the poorly closed suitcases, the dry smell that hit as soon as we got off the plane. Mutena seemed like a different man there. He walked with his head held high, proud as if he had finally returned to the throne of a lost kingdom. His daughters were the silent heroes of that distorted story. We arrived at the village of Magbana after hours under it rose. It was everything opposite of what he had described. Mud houses, barefoot children, heavy silence. Women attaching us behind dark veils. There were no colors, no laughter, no fairy tales, just dust and suffocating premonition. In the back of my mind, a phrase hammered. This is not a visit. This is a trap. But Nadia, still clinging to hold, whispered, maybe it's just different from what we imagined. And the following days, the English clothes disappeared. The books and notebooks too. Our freedom was being torn away bit by bit, like pages from a diary ripped by strange hands. And what was supposed to be a vacation trip never had a day to end. There, at that moment, everything began to crumble. We just didn't know it yet. They separated us in the first few days. I was taken to a simple house without electricity, with a dirty floor and a cracked wooden windows. It was there that they informed me, without ceremony, that I had been promised in marriage. My fiancé, a man who barely spoke to me, almost twice my age. I tried to protest, cried, begged, but nobody listened to me. Here, they said, this is how it works. Nadia had less time than me to understand what was happening. She was also forcibly married to a man she had never seen. She, who until a week before drew hearts in her school notebook, was now treated as property. We were transformed into wives, girls with children's souls trapped in bodies that nobody respected anymore. We worked all day, fetching water from the well, grinding grains, cooking and washing, all under surveillance. Every attempt to question was seen as Western rebellion, and any mention of England was punished with silence or contempt. Our voices began to disappear, and gradually the world also stopped hearing us. It was 8 years of invisible prison. Time didn't run in Magbana. It trickled like sand through fingers, taking away youth, hope, and even the name we once had. I was no longer Sana. I was the wife, the woman of the house, the English woman who should adapt. Every dawn I woke up not knowing if I still remembered how to speak freely. Nadia seemed more resistant, or maybe she had just found another way to survive. But inside, the promise I had made still burned. I wouldn't leave Nadia there forever. We wouldn't die in that place. And it was with that thought that I began, in secret, to look for a way out. In 1988, I received unexpected news. My mother in England was trying to locate me through the British Embassy. Someone from the village, perhaps a woman with compassion, had managed to get the possibility of a return to me. But there was a condition. Cruel, unacceptable. I could only leave if I left my 2-year-old son behind. I had never hated that choice so much. I spent nights awake, with him sleeping in my lap, imagining what was worse, living in captivity with him or fleeing and carrying the guilt of having left him. But I knew deep down that if I stayed, we would all be trapped forever. And if I could get out, I could fight for him, for Nadia, for all of us. I left, but I left with my heart in pieces. The road back had no victory, no relief. I got off the plane in London with empty hands, a dry face, and a pain that had no name. People looked at me as if I were a survivor, but I didn't feel alive. I had left a part of me in that desert. in my son's eyes, in my sister's voice, in the cracked ground of Makbana. The only thing that kept me standing was the promise I repeated to myself the same day, still with my suitcase in hand. I'm going back for them. I'm going to bring my sister back, even if it takes my whole life. I came back, but I didn't come back whole. I got off the plane in London as if I were invading a place that no longer belonged to me. It remained the same, red buses, grey streets, hurried people, but inside me something had broken forever. I was home, with my heart buried in a mud village on the other side of the world. In the first days in Birmingham, I tried to reconnect with life. Slept in a clean bed, eat without fear, sit in my mother's sofa and pretended everything was in the past. But the body healed faster than the soul. The nightmares came every night. Nadia crying, Marcus reaching out to me, and me, motionless like a statue of guilt. It was like living in two places at once. Here where there was freedom, and there where everything in love was still trapped. But I didn't have time to break down. I had made a promise, and now on this side it was time to start a fight. I went to the Foreign Office with the letter I had written myself in desperation. Told my story with wet eyes, trying to put into words something that was still bleeding inside. I explained, my sister is still there. My nephew was born in captivity. My son Marcus was still with his father, not knowing who I am. And you know what I heard? It's a cultural matter. We won't interfere in family affairs. They are Yemeni citizens now. Each answer was a knife, cold, polite, sharp. I wrote to embassies, I called NGOs, I knocked on every possible door. Some didn't even open. Others opened just to give me hope, before closing again with empty promises. England was a free country. At that moment, it was just a place where bureaucracy knew how to say no politely. I came home every night with my fingers marked by papers and my back heavy with frustration. I looked at old photos of Nadia, still a girl with curious eyes, and whispered, I haven't forgotten you. I'm going to get you out of there, even if it costs me my whole life. By then, it wasn't just a promise anymore. It was the only piece of me that still made sense. I thought I had felt all possible pain, but I still didn't know what it was like to be betrayed by the one who gave you your name. Shortly after I returned, I discovered that my father continued living peacefully. He still lived in England. He still walked on the streets as if nothing had happened. No remorse, no apology, no visit. It was as if Nadia and I were pages torn from a story he had chosen to rewrite. One day, a distant aunt told me something that never left my head. She said that when asked about us, we respond coldly. They're fine. It's their destiny. Destiny. That word pierced me like a blade. He delivered us. He sold us. He left us behind. And he still had the audacity to call it destiny. For weeks I couldn't sleep. His face appeared in my dreams like a shadow. Not screaming, not crying, not begging for forgiveness, but indifferent, as if he had never been a father, as if Nadia had never existed. I began to relive every conversation, every silence, every time he spoke of Yemen as a paradise, and I felt a chill down my spine. It was all there, the clues, the warnings, but I was just a girl trying to protect her sister. And even as an adult, it was hard for me to accept that someone could look at their own daughters and see them as currency. It was in these mixtures of rage and helplessness that I decided to transform grief into denunciation. If the government didn't act, if institutions didn't care, I would scream, and I would scream so loud that the world would have to listen. Even if it was for her name, even if it was to tear the silence he left us as inheritance. One day a letter arrived. The envelope was crumbled, the paper wrinkled, and the handwriting was hers, Nadia, reading calmly, almost formally, as if someone were watching. It said she was fine, that the children were growing up, that everything was under control. But each word seemed to swallow the next, as if they were said with fear. There was no emotion, no longing, not even a single question about me. I knew my sister. I knew how to read what wasn't written. I could imagine the scene, her sitting on a worn carpet, trying to find safe words, looking around before writing each line. Maybe with a child sleeping in her lap, maybe with another asking for bread, maybe crying inside and smiling outside, as she always did. I kept the letter like someone keeps an open wound. It was the first time I had heard anything from her in years, but it also a brutal reminder that she was still there, trapped, with children who were born without knowing what freedom was. And worse, maybe she herself had already forgotten. I closed my eyes, and I saw her clearly, thin, with her face covered by a faded veil, walking through those mud streets with Tina in one arm and Haney pulling at her skirt. the sun punishing her skin and her trying to maintain dignity within dust and exhaustion. But what killed me the most was the silence that came after. I would reply, I would send letters, I would ask for details. I would tell her about Birmingham, about mom, about the time I spent there. I would send all photos of us, both smiling in the school garden. I never knew if she received them. And when she replied, it was always the same neutral tone, almost rehearsed, as if someone there was erasing her emotions, letter by letter. Sometimes I would wonder, does she still dream of getting out of there, or has she learned to accept the world as the only possible one? But one thing I knew, even if she had given up, I still hadn't, and as long as her name pulsed within me, I would continue fighting, because if her hope was dying, then she would need mine to survive. There came a moment where writing letters was no longer enough. Waiting for responses became a way of dying slowly. I knew my sister was still alive, but it was as if the world had erased her name. The newspapers talk about politics, war, economists, but no one mentioned a British girl being held by force in the interiors of Yemen. Talked about the children she had given birth to in captivity. No one knew that I woke up every night hearing my son's cry, even though he was thousands of miles away from me. It was my mother who said, "If no one wants to listen, then let's scream." And that's what we did. Together we looked for a writer, someone who could transform pain into words. His name was Andrew Crofts, and with him I wrote everything, every detail, every humiliation, every broken promise. Every night I thought I would go insane. It was called Sold, because that's what they did to us. They sold us. The publication was like an explosion. Suddenly the story the world ignored was in newspapers, radios, interviews. People I had never seen were crying for me. Women wrote to me saying, "This happened to me too." There was commotion, there was empathy, but to my surprise, action was still minimal. Everyone said it was terrible, that it was revolting, that they needed to do something. But time passed and no one did anything. I took a part of the money from the book and created a fund, a real resource to try to bring Nadia and my nephews back. I hired lawyers, I contacted translators, I paid supposed specialists in Yemen culture. Many promised the world. Everyone wanted to be a part of the solution. But most just wanted the money. Some disappeared, others invented the excuses, and the fund, which was born from a cry of desperation, began to evaporate before the greed of those who called themselves allies. It was like leaving the same prison, but on this side, promises, waiting, and lies. And even so I continued, because it was no longer just about Nadia, it was all about the voices buried in the silence of the desert. If telling our story was the only weapon I had left, then I was going to use it, even if no one wanted to listen. The months turned into years and the responses disappeared. The letters stopped coming, the phone calls brought no news. The promises became echoes. It was as if, after a brief flash of attention, the world had decided to turn its face away. Again. Kept trying. I wrote to new organizations, sought any contact that could bring news of Nadia, Marcus, Haney, Tina. But the response was always the same. Silence. Or worse, polite words that meant, "We can't do anything." With each refusal, it was as if I had buried a little more hope, but never completely. I remember an afternoon in 1996. I received a note, very brief, brought, they said, by someone who passed through the village. Nadia supposedly said she was living her life and that I didn't need to worry anymore. Just that. But how could I not worry? How could I accept that the girl who drew castles in notebooks now lived in a mud house with children in her arms and a future tied by traditions of a place that swallowed her without asking permission? I would close my eyes and see everything. Nadia with the same gray scarf, tired eyes, feet cracked by the dry ground. Pot on the fire, a baby crying, another pulling at her skirt. And her smiling, not from joy, but because she learned that smiling was safer than screaming. That's what kept me moving, the doubt. Did she still dream of freedom, or had she just given up? This question tore me apart, because fighting for someone who wants to be safe is one thing, but continuing to fight for someone who may accepted prison as home, that requires a faith that bleeds. And even so I continued. I clipped articles, I sent letters, I wrote down names of diplomats. I sought help where no one saw a way out. Because giving up for me would be worse than losing. It would be erasing the last spark of that promise that kept me alive when everything around wanted to bury me. I would tell myself every night in a low voice like a solitary prayer, "Nadia, if you're still there, I am here too." And as long as I breathed, that promise also breathed with me. Even wounded, even alone, even drowning in silence. In the year 2000, hope arrived disguised as a whisper. Someone who had passed through Makmanda said that he had seen Nadia. She was at the village market with 2 of her children. She was buying bread. She wore a dark veil, part of her face covered, but the eyes were hers. She walked with firmness, but without haste. She talked to her children in a calm, low tone. The person who reported said that she seemed accustomed, calm, as if she were part of that world. But that didn't make sense. I knew the Nadia who dreamed of traveling the world, who scribbled stars in the corners of notebooks, the one who laughed at me in the school stairs, the one who once hugged me and said, "Promise you'll always be with me." She didn't belong to that market, to that cracked earth, to that silence. And even if time had passed, even if she had children and routine, deep down, I couldn't believe she had surrendered. Maybe she was just surviving. I saw this scene on loop in my head. Her holding one of her children's hand, smiling to the skies but with her eyes fixed on something far away. Maybe remembering me, maybe trying not to remember. This report should have comforted me. It was alive, but the truth is it tore me apart inside. Because it wasn't just her who was distant. My son Marcus too. The one who slept on my chest while I planned to escape. The one I left behind, believing that one day I would come back for him. Now he was almost 14 years old, and I no longer knew what face he had. If he remembered me, if he hated me, if he thought I had abandoned him. That was the kind of pain that doesn't appear in photos and interviews. From the outside, people saw a strong, determined woman, an activist. But inside, I was broken and incomplete. And even so, with each small rumor, each crooked clue, I held on like someone gripping a rope in the middle of a storm. Because as long as there was someone in the world seeing Nadia, I would continue looking for her, even if it was through other people's eyes. Around the year 2000, I realized I needed to try again. The first time I wrote our story, I was bleeding. This time, I was tired, but still standing. That's when I began writing A Promise to Nadia. I put in each line the years that followed the first book, the doors that closed, the promises broken by NGOs, lawyers, and opportunists, the government silence, the anguish of receiving fragment news always through third parties, and, above all, the pain of not knowing if Nadia was still waiting, if she was only existing on the outside, and that inside. The book was published in 2002, and once again the story spread. More interviews, more cameras, more debates, more shocked people. But in practice, nothing changed. Nadia continued in Makmanda, invisible to the world's eyes, and Marcus, my son, now a teenager, lived with his father, without any memory of the woman who brought him into the world. Sometimes I would wonder, was my voice really being heard, or were people just getting emotional and moving on with their lives? Deep down, I wasn't writing just for me. I was writing for all the others who were still trapped, nameless, bookless, voiceless. A Promise to Nadia wasn't just a title. It was a reminder that the promise doesn't just die because the world forgets, that the fight doesn't end just because justice falls silent, that hope, even wounded, can still write one last line. And if someone somewhere read and decided to do something, they would have been worth it. I was no longer writing just to find my sister. I was writing so that no other girl would need to be found. Even today, girls cross borders with their father's name on their passport and they seal destiny without realizing it. They are promises of vacations, reunions, culture, but behind each word there may exist a prison disguised as tradition. And sometimes a video like this is the only way for someone to hear what the world prefers to silence. Next story, we will learn about another truth covered up for decades, an even cooler drama, where a woman with no way out had to choose between fleeing alone or dying with her own children in her arms. If this story touched you, prepare yourself, because the next one might change everything you believe about love, abandonment, and the price of freedom.